What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Find out every Monday at 8 on Notes from an Artist. Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist. Revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. Every Monday at 8 on CygnusRadio.com. And check out previous episodes on our podcast. Notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com.
Hi, this is David Gross, and along with co-host Tom Semioli, I want to welcome you to another edition of Notes from an Artist. Tonight, we are pleased to be with bassist extraordinaire, Mr. Percy Jones. A true innovator of the fretless bass, Percy has done things with and to his bass that are great sonic achievements. He was the co-founder of the band Brand X and has worked with everyone from Brian Eno, David Sylvian, Kate Bush, Paranoids, and many, many more. There's even an instructional video, Bass Explorations with Percy Jones. So let's get started. Hi, Tom. Hi, Percy.
Hey, Percy,
Hello.
Can you hear us? Are we coming in loud and clear?
Yeah, I'm just turning it up a bit.
All right, crank us.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, good to see you, Percy. How you been?
Not too bad.
Percy, the last time I saw you was with your Porta studio at the Knitting Factory, the old Knitting Factory.
Oh, yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah, a wonderful show, though.
Austin Street.
Exactly. That was the title track from Percy's record, Cape Catastrophe, which is the record that he was promoting at that time at the Knitting Factory. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
That was a nice place to play, actually.
Yeah, I kind of liked it more than the new place. I ended up playing at the new place a hell of a lot more, but that old room was just perfect.
Yeah. I think after they moved to the new place, I think I did one or maybe two gigs there in the tunnels.
And another funny story, about 6 years ago, I was on the road and I was in the Midwest. And so the band, we were at some breakfast place, and this gentleman with a British accent comes up to me and says, "You guys musicians?" We go, "Yes. I'm John Goodsall."
Where was this?
Was it Minnesota or Michigan? Where was he living? Because it was literally near where he was.
Minnesota.
Okay, yeah.
That's where he's been, for quite a while.
Yeah, it was interesting. I said, "What the hell are you doing in Minnesota?" He said, "I got married and da-da-da-da-da."
I once walked into Brian Eno in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
I was to buy some groceries or something, walked down the corner and walked into Eno. We both said to each other, "What are you doing here?"
How funny. Oh, gosh.
Now that Brooklyn is such a hip neighborhood, but Percy, David and I were just talking, and a sad day today. Charlie Watts passed.
Yeah.
The great Charlie Watts. And we're just thinking your career started as a player on the bandstand in the mid-'60s when you were with, I guess, the Viceroys and the Liverpool Sound.
That was a very obscure track called "We'll All Be Spacemen Before We Die," which was by a group called the Liverpool Scene. Now, the Liverpool Scene was basically a bunch of poets, and they had bands behind them. And this is the one with Percy Jones on bass. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Can you talk about the residual effects of what the Stones had in particular on a generation of musicians? In America, when we talk to musicians of our generation, your generation, the Yardbirds and the Stones were huge influence on a generation of American musicians. What about for you in the UK? What impact did the Stones have on you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when they started out, when Brian Jones was in the band, they were much more of an R&B, and for me, a little more edgy than they became later on. So I really liked the early stuff they were doing.
The Rolling Stones, Route 66, off their first album, England's Newest Hitmakers. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
Later on, after Brian Jones died, they seemed to take a slightly different path, more of a straight-up rock and roll.
Right.
Which I'm not criticizing that. I found the early Stones more interesting back in those days. Anyway, talking about the mid '60s.
And then, of course, were you aware that Bill Wyman was actually playing a fretless bass?
Yeah. Although every time I saw him on TV, like Top of the Pops or whatever, it was always a fretted bass.
Okay.
I'd heard that he played fretless, yeah.
Well, David, if I'm not mistaken, the Framus, what he did was he pulled the frets out of the Framus, which was a small bass. I guess it was and a common instrument in the UK in that era. And then he put a putty in it, so it may have given the impression that there were lines on the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that.
So maybe he was playing fretless when I thought he was playing fretted.
Yeah.
Well, that's a kudos to his intonation.
That was the Stones again doing King Bee with Bill Wyman on a fretless Framus bass. Well, the others were so out of tune, it really didn't matter. I think that was the first just intonation bass, actually. But, it's interesting, too, because, Tom and I, when we're talking with folks, the early days, most drummers came out of the jazz idiom. I mean, there was no rock and roll. So what they were listening to was completely different. I know when I grew up in Manhattan, and on the 14th floor of my building was Don Lamont. And he, played with Woody Herman. He played with Charlie Parker. He was the guy who took me to Manny's when I went to get my very first P bass. And you remember Stuart from Manny's?
No.
One of the brothers. Well, he came downstairs and he had a Sunburst P bass in a case. And he said, David, the only P bass we have is fretless. And I was walking out of there with a Sunburst P bass no matter what. So my very first real bass, as opposed to the K and Sekova with the ski slope necks, was a Fender P bass in '69.
Wow. I used to have one.
Percy, you grew up listening to British R&B, and I guess the Stones, their peer group, Graham Bond, Alexis Corner, and Georgie Fame. And then, of course, you got turned on to American blues, Howlin' Wolf, Sonny Boy Williamson, Muddy Waters. One of the things that always fascinates David and myself is, what was it about American black music that was born of slavery in the United States? Why did that resonate so strongly with British youth of your generation?
I don't know. I mean, the British musicians just really related to the feeling of that stuff, which doesn't make much sense because
culturally,
there's no slavery going on in England back then at that point. I remember getting into a friend of mine, African-American guy, like a while ago, and he was complaining about the British musicians stealing from the African-American blues guys. And I tried to tell him, no, they're playing that music because they really like it.
Yeah.
They like the music and they want to play it, so they're playing it. But I mean, there are instances where those guys have been ripped off by some British bands. I mean, we all know about that, which is exception rather than rule.
And there you have it. Sonny Boy Williamson doing the original Bring It On Home, and then Led Zeppelin doing Bring It On Home to Me. Very similar, don't you think? This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
That's a really difficult question to answer. But there's something about the music that the British guys got into and just wanted to play that stuff, me included.
Yeah. And then, of course, what's even more fascinating is the British, when the Stones came to America, they re-educated the Americans, and this is your music.
I know. Yeah. That was quite bizarre, actually.
Right, and artists, the Stones had people such as B.B. King open up for them and Buddy Guy, and these guys were playing the Chitlin circuit. And the Stones, who were, Jesus, Dave, they probably weren't even, more than 25 years old. They were bringing these guys on the road, and they put them on a bigger stage to which they currently exist. I mean, if it weren't for the Stones and your generation, the Yardbirds, the Animals, the Beatles to an extent, those guys would have never played. They would have been, their whole career would have been the Chitlin circuit.
Yeah. It's almost like some of those British bands were introducing the blues to their own country.
Yeah.
Bizarre, really. Well, the blues guys, they were discriminated against,
Here, yeah.
There were only certain places they could play at.
Exactly.
Jim Crow thing was going on. You couldn't eat in restaurant. There was a whole discrimination going on.
That's why folks like, so many, Geno Washington's one that migrated to England. And I can't think of who's the saxophone player, David? Dexter Gordon. Right. And it's interesting. My wife is African-American, and we watch Later with Jules Holland.
So is mine, yeah.
And whenever we watch Later with Jules Holland, she is amazed that the British R&B acts have more soul and are more organic than the American R&B acts. We have, and we'll disparage, Rihanna and Beyonce, who are basically computerized. And then you'll see these, the British R&B acts, and they're really digging in and playing.
Amy Winehouse, for example.
Yeah, well, there's a perfect example.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was Back to Black, Amy Winehouse. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Well, you think about it, after World War II, you had all this great music being infused through Liverpool and other port cities. Yeah. And so much of it was by American soldiers who just brought their records over, and they took it seriously. And I think that had an awful lot to do with it. And that's the thing. I think there's a seriousness to it. I mean, I was 12 years old when the Stones came to America. And I knew nothing of Lowell Fusen. I knew nothing of Little Walter, but I knew their music because of what other folks were doing. And I guess it all comes, Ron Carter and Tom and I had an interesting conversation. It came down to, it's the big M, music. And it either touches you or it doesn't. Yeah. And I think that's really the key. And it really was wonderful that British musicians caught the ear and go, wow, this is great stuff. And then all of a sudden it came back a little bit more homogenized. And I think that had something to do with it too. Mm-hmm. Boom, here we are now.
Also the media, in the first half of the 60s, there was a limited number of radio stations. It was really just the BBC.
Right.
And they were playing just top 40 pop. And the only radio station that anybody was interested in was Radio Luxembourg, which was on the continent.
Broadcasting on 208 meters, this is your Station of the Stars, Radio Luxembourg.
And you couldn't hear them in the daytime. You had to wait till after the sun had gone down so the signal would skip off the ionosphere. Me and all my peers, that's what we listened to, was Radio Luxembourg. And they were playing a lot of the American stuff, Chuck Berry and Booker T, and that's what we were all listening to. But you'd have to listen at night, and it would fade in and out. So you come to a really favorite part of a tune, and the signal would fade out.
That was Maybelline by Chuck Berry, followed by Time is Tight by Booker T and the MGs. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
The old radios back in those days, they didn't have synthesized radios. So the thing would drift. So you tune it in, and then 10 minutes later, it's starting to drift off. You'd have to retune it. So all that stuff was going on, but it just reinforced the fact that people were starving for what Radio Luxembourg was playing, Yeah. And this was before the pirate ships started.
Right. I was going to ask you about that. What a big influence that must have been on you.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, it was a source of music that people wanted to listen to that they couldn't get from the BBC, and that went on for a while. And then the British government shut them all down. They boarded them, confiscated the equipment, and the BBC poached a lot of the DJs, like John Peel and so on.
Yeah.
So I think at that point, the BBC started to smell the coffee and wisen up to the fact that they needed to change their format a little bit.
Right.
If you can't beat them, join them. Right.
Yeah.
Or if you can't beat them, hire them.
Right. But African American music had a huge impact on it in Britain. No question.
Now, also, you in your formative days, one of your early bass mentors was Danny Thompson. Yes, with
Pentangle.
No, it was early.
Yeah, I remember I was still living in Wales at the time, and me and a couple of mates went to a gig in Hereford, which is about 40 miles away, just across the border. Because Alexis Corner was doing a gig, and Alexis Corner had rhythm sections, Danny Thompson and Terry Cox, who did rhythm section from later on, Pentangle. Right. And it caught my attention because Alexis was mostly a blues guy, but Danny Thompson is very much from jazz.
Yes.
So they were playing this kind of, to me, it sounded like a hybrid of jazz and blues and maybe some folk mixed in. But there was all this syncopation going on, which I wasn't really... hadn't really listened to it before. So I remember that gig quite well. That kind of started steering me more towards jazz, broadly speaking.
That was Alexis Corner, Blues Incorporated, doing their version of Kansas City. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Well, I've always thought that at a certain point, when your playing matures, and you can't just sit there and be happy doing what you used to do. It's that Oliver Wendell Holmes your mind stretches and you never can go back.
Yeah.
That I know for me, it was Bitches Brew. When I heard Bitches Brew, things ended. It was just, oh gosh. And then, of course, a few years later with Michael Henderson turning his E down to a D, it's like, oh, what do we do now? And it just became prog rock came in. Of course, living in New York, there were so many great clubs downtown. Slugs, you could see Ornette, you could see Rossine, Roland Kirk.
There was a club called Unganos, wasn't there, on the Upper West Side?
2 blocks from where I grew up.
Oh, because I came to New York in '69 with the Liverpool scene for a tour, and we played at Unganos.
That was a great place. You know what it is now?
No.
It's a fancy restaurant. It's the people who own Odeon down in Soho own this place. And in between, it was a cabaret club called the Grand Finale.
That's where I met Charles Mingus. The Liverpool scene, who I was playing with at the time, we did a set sort of for the press. And after we finished playing, Mike Evans, the saxophone player, came over and said, Mingus is here. And we were both Mingus fans. You know,
Yeah.
that point. So I looked over at the food, you know, they had a buffet set up, and I looked over and there's Mingus filling his plate up with food, getting a drink. I mean, he didn't come there to hear us. He came there for the food, you know. So we got talking to him and he said, I'm playing at the Vanguard on Thursday, or, you know, if you all want to come down. So I think the following Thursday we went down there. The place was almost empty and we were all sitting like right up the front, you know. It was pretty much the Mingus band and us in the place. Of course, that was very exciting for me, front row seat.
And what a great place to see the band.
Yeah.
Now that Liverpool scene, you guys came here to do a tour of America?
Yeah, in '69, we had done a British tour opening for Led Zeppelin. And in late '69, I think it was in the fall, early winter, we came over here. And the first gig was at Kent State University in Ohio, opening for Sly and the Family Stone. A total mismatch. I remember we walked out onto the stage and the audience all started laughing at us. Before we played a note, they were laughing at us. So we played our set and they politely, this is in a gymnasium, they politely sat through the set. Not really much applause, but it was like polite toleration, you know.
Sure.
And then Slide came on. And of course, the place went berserk. You know, we did. Remember, we opened for Sly and Steve Miller Band.
Okay.
Well, that's a little closer to reality.
The Who, the Kinks. And there were a whole bunch of British bands over here at that time. And when we were in New York, there was a bar on 48th Street and 8th called, forgotten the name of it, the Haymarket. And they had Red Barrel, you know, which is a British beer. So all the British bands would go in this place on nights off and drink Red Barrel, you know. So it was like a home from home.
But what was your first impression of America when you came here? Because, I mean, this was, to British musicians, this was the promised land. This is where all their heroes were.
Well, it was exciting. I mean, I'd never been here before. I mean, New York especially was the place where jazz was going on big time.
Right.
So, and I was into that sort of stuff. So it was quite exciting. Yeah, I mean, it was quite a big experience. Me, having grown up in the country, I mean, I grew up on a farm in rural Wales. So it was, you know.
A cultural shock. Yeah, a cultural shock.
Yeah.
Did that plant the seed in you back then that you may one day want to move to New York?
Thinking about it, the possibility. I didn't actually move here until
the 80s, I think, right?
A decade later, yeah.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the fretless bass, which David and I are aficionados of, and had many. We spoke with Michael Manring, Larry Grenadier, who also played fretless. We also spoke with Rudy Sarza too, right, David? He had fretless in a
heavy metal band.
In a heavy metal band with Ozzy of all people, and it doesn't get much heavier than that.
I didn't know that.
What inspired you to gravitate to the fretless? I understand your first fretless was a hollow body Gretsch, yes?
Well, all the bass players I listened to almost were upright players. There was a couple of electric bass players I liked. There was a guy who played for Georgie Fame, Barton. I thought was a really good electric bass player. I played Freddie bass, and he died very young. I think he's early 20s. But it was him and maybe a couple of other people, but predominantly upright players. So at one point I had a Gretsch Freddie bass, a hollow body with an extra long scale. I can't remember the model number. It had a spike that you could put in the bottom, upright if you wanted to. So I used to mess around with that bass. I used to put piezo accelerometers on it, dial the frets down just under the top string.
Wow.
So the top string was fretless. I think it was fretted. I was doing all this stuff to it, and it was gradually getting more and more beaten up because I was drilling all these holes in it, putting pickups on, taking them off preamps. But then I was sort of gravitating towards the idea of a fretless. And then in, I think it was 1974, I saw an ad in the back of the Melody Maker, which was a predominant music paper. I was selling a Fender fretless P bass for 200 quid. And I had just gotten the publishing advance for 200 quid, like the week before. So I went up to North London to this guy's house and looked at the bass, and it was in really good nick. There was a few looked like Guinness stains on it. Apart from that, it was in really good nick. So I bought it, took it home, started playing it, and I immediately. I know this might sound a bit weird, but I immediately felt sort of comfortable on it. Immediately I thought, wow, I can do stuff on this that I can't do on a fretted bass,
Sure.
Even though, my intonation needed work and a few other things. I think Rob Lumley bought a keyboard with his Advance. Goodsall bought a fur coat.
Wise investment. Now, was this a line?
He could have used that in Minnesota, that's for sure.
That's true, yeah. I mean,
was it a lined fretless or was it a pure, no line fretless?
No lines, but dots.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that must have been very rare back then to find a fretless P bass. Then.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's totally fortuitous. That I had the money.
Yeah.
And then I saw this. I just happened to see this ad in the Melody Maker. It was just total fortuitous timing.
They had lovely rosewood necks.
Yeah.
Those old P basses. I'd love to find one of the old ones again. I think I paid $180 for it in New York back in 16.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And my God, the sound, those old P basses were just very thick necks and nice fat rosewood. What a beautiful combination.
Yeah. I ended up building a preamp and putting it in just a unity gain buffer so that it had a low output impedance. Because one thing with a P bass, a passive P bass, is the longer the cord that you're using, the more high end you lose. Because of the capacitance of the cable. So I built a little preamp, no EQ, just an impedance buffer, really gain, which had enough current to drive the cable, so there were no issues with losing high end.
Sure.
Which made help with the attack a little bit, but it still had that P bass sound,
Yeah.
Fundamentally. At that point, we didn't have a record deal. We used to get together every week to jam.
Yeah.
Studio in, I think it was Clapham, South London. Mm-hmm. Every Wednesday night, a gang of us would get together. We just used to jam, for fun. That's when I picked up when I bought the P-Bass voice a long time ago. Yeah, it was actually right around the time that Island Records miraculously gave us a deal. And we had 6 weeks until we started recording. I made a determination to try and figure out how to play this bass in 6 weeks and play it on the record, which I did. Right. I mean, I really crammed it in. I was playing the thing every day for hours.
How did that affect your technique? Just trying to, because the whole thing with the fretless bass, when you switch from frets, is intonation, intonation, intonation.
Well, that was the biggest challenge. I mean, the left and right hand techniques didn't change that much, but I just found I could express myself much more. You could play quarter notes, if you deliberately pull a note straight or flat, like a singer does. Slide harmonics around, and it was just a much more expressive instrument, Yeah,
a lot of more tonal possibilities, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're easier to play, oddly enough.
Well, yeah, a solid body bass is less work than a hollow body, because, you're playing a hollow body bass, you're also driving the air in the...
Sure. But I even mean from fretted to fretless. I've always found fretless to be a much more comfortable fit, easier to play with. I have some 6-string basses, so I like doing a lot of the chordal stuff with that, but you don't worry about fret noise, unless of course you want to add some fret noise to it with your nail or something like that. And they just seem to be a wonderful instrument. And you're right about the vocal quality. I think that's important, quarter tones.
That's a good point about the fret noise. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, when you're playing a fretted bass, you have to pay attention to that. Yeah.
And then also from being a fretless player, especially in a rock situation or a pop music situation, you have to be more deliberate in your note choices. It's not, sometimes you can fly around the neck with frets because you don't have to worry where you're going to land. But a fretted bass, every note has to mean something.
Yeah. I had a bad experience once here in New York, not long after I moved here. I got on this session. I can't remember how. I think somebody had pulled out and then they called me to go in and do it instead. So I walked in and I had a wall 4-string fretless. The producer guy said, he just took one look at the bass, said, we don't need that. And he went into a closet and took out a Fender Fretted Precision, said, use this. I'm immediately like, fucked, I ended up playing this bass. And on top of that, I'm not a great reader. I mean, I think it was a chord chart. I can sort of read chord charts on cable.
Right, yeah.
I'm trying to play this bass that I'm totally uncomfortable on. And the producer guy is standing next to me playing a guitar, and he's like 6'6", 300 pounds. So I got through it. I got out of there alive, but it was a bad experience.
That was Nuclear Burn, from Unorthodox Behavior by Brand X off their first record. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Let's continue with our guest, Percy Jones.
Around the time you started playing fretless, there was this other guy playing fretless in the United States from Florida, Jaco Pastorius. And all of a sudden, the fretless bass came to the forefront and seemingly, David, overnight. How did that, obviously your playing style is very different from Jaco. And of course, he's playing in a different palette with Weather Report, although there's a similarity between Weather Report and Brand X. Talk about the evolution of the fretless now it wasn't such an odd instrument anymore. Now it was at the forefront, especially in the jazz world.
Yeah, well, back then, as far as I knew, there was hardly anybody playing fretless.
Right.
I knew of it. I think the guy in Canned Heat.
Larry the Mole Taylor.
I don't know his name, but I think he played a fretless, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. Yeah. I know he did a lot of session work, like he did Monkeys and, all that, LA session guy, but I could see him playing fretless. Sure.
I might have got it wrong, but I remember somebody telling me that somebody in one of the American bands played a fretless.
Freebo, of course.
Freebo with Bonnie Raitt. Yeah.
In England, I can't think of anybody at the time in England.
Yeah. Right.
I knew.
What I found most compelling about your playing, besides the fact that you were almost a mad scientist on the instrument, was the fact that you carved a very interesting niche. Tom and I, before you got on, we were remarking, we could hear one of your notes and we know exactly.
It's Percy.
It's you.
Oh.
However, 90,000 Jaco imitators. Were you conscious of him, which made you more conscious of where you were headed? Or were you headed there anyway, and it just so happened, that guy from Florida was playing the same instrument?
I remember when I first heard Jaco, I think it was 77, only 77.
Okay, yeah.
He had a solo record.
Oh, yes, the Jaco Pastorius, yes, yeah.
Donna Lee and all.
Donna Lee, yes.
That's when I first heard him, and of course it was like, wow, he's really good, And I think you have to give him credit for really introducing fretless bass to the community.
Yeah.
Certainly more than I did. And later on, actually, I started getting a bit of critique from some people saying, Percy's a Jaco ripoff, which is a bit disappointing. Not so much lately. I mean, not so much in the last 10 years or so, but there was a period.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It was getting a bit tedious hearing that stuff. I had the utmost respect for Jaco. I thought he was a great bass player and innovative. He had his own thing going on.
And another fretless bass player in that era that was Fernando Saunders, of course, with Fernando Saunders.
Oh, yeah.
With Larry Young and then, of course, John McLaughlin's One Truth Band. So in fretless bass, you were starting to hear more and more. But Brand X, quite the high profile. I remember when those records came out and, we gobbled them up. All the musicians were intrigued with that. I'm surprised. How did Phil Collins have time to do Brand X when he was in Genesis?
He didn't really. The way it happened was we, like I said earlier, we used to get together every week and jam. There was a guy called Sheds who used to hang out with us and help us with equipment and stuff. And somehow he hooked up an audition with Island Records. So these two Island Records A&R guys came to listen to us, and we were improvising and we were just making stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
I was bowing the bass, wah-wah pedal.
It's great.
And they loved it, and they signed us to Island. So we started rehearsing at Island's rehearsal room, and we did a record for them, which had vocals on it. A bit like a sort of average white band sort of stuff, but below average,
The below average white band.
We didn't really like it, so we asked Chris Blackwell if we could do another one, instrumental.
Okay.
He agreed to that. So we changed the lineup in the band somewhat, and the original drummer stepped out, who was very good at what he did, was more groove stuff playing, but, we realized we needed a different kind of drummer to do what we wanted to do. So Danny Wilding, one of the A&R guys, said, you should try the guy in Genesis. Well, I didn't really know much about Genesis at the time. Anyway, this guy comes down. Well, actually, Bill Bruford came down first. He turned it down. And Phil came down and he liked it, decided to join the band. So we did another record for Island with Phil, all instrumental, and Island didn't like it. They didn't want to put it out. So fortuitously, I think Phil helped with this Charisma label picked it up.
Right.
Okay.
And that was Unorthodox Behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
So it almost never made it out.
Saw the light of day, yeah.
But to answer your question, Phil, he in those early days, we were doing mostly one-nighters in the UK. We play the pub clubs around London. Sometimes we'd drive up to Manchester, north of England, do a gig up there, drive home, just one-nighters. And he did a lot of those. But then when we started getting US tours, he couldn't do them because of jazz.
Of course, yeah.
So then we were stuck for a drummer. And Phil said to me at one point, he said, if you guys can hang on for a couple of years, I might leave Genesis and play with you guys full time. And I said, no, you can't. It's impractical.
That was Sun in the Night off the second Brand X album, More Rock and Roll. And that was Phil Collins on vocals and the great Percy Jones on fretless bass. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
So I called up Alfonso Johnson in LA because we had a tour, US tour coming up. Do you know any good drummers over there? Alfonso said there's a guy in New York, Kenwood Denard, gave me his number. So I called Kenwood, talked to him, and then I came over a couple of weeks ahead of time and rehearsed with Kenwood the best I could. I tried to teach him the material, as much of it as I could,
That was Malaga Virgin, Brand X, featuring both our guest Percy Jones and Kenwood Denard. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
And the rest of the guys came over 2 weeks later. We did some more rehearsals, and then it shaped up good enough to go out and do the gigs. From there on, we used several drummers. It was Kenwood, Chuck Burgee, Mike Clark, Pierre Merlin, Frank Katz, all good drummers. To answer your question, there was conflict with Phil's Genesis.
That was a fairly high-profile group. I mean, I remember hearing Brand X on FM radio, buying the records. And it was also a very interesting time in music because you had such a wide array of genres. In the mainstream, you had prog-rock was very big, and I guess your peers in that time, Jethro Tull and Gentle Giant. So there was, and of course, there was Weather Report along with Brand X and Return to Forever. And even, punk rock or the pub rockers, Graham Parker, Elvis Costello. So it seems like there was a lot more diversity in the mainstream in that time. And it wouldn't be out of place for me as a teenager to go see Brand X one night and then 2 nights later go see Elvis Costello or Patti Smith or something like that.
It was a good period, actually. There was good stuff going on, I thought. It was an exciting time. I remember towards the late 70s, we started getting a bit of flack from the British press. I remember we played at Nebworth Festival, and there was a review in the Melody Maker that said Brand X sounded like pebbles on a tin roof. Punk rock was starting to come up.
Right.
And that was supposed to be the new working class music.
What we found, what David and I find ironic about punk is the more popular so-called punk artists, such as Elvis Costello, were studied musicians. They were good players. Nick Lowe was an accomplished writer. They just cut their hair and put on thin ties, and that's about pretty much all it was.
I remember going into the Marquee Club because we used to play there a lot in the 70s. And it wasn't long before I moved over here. I was on Wardour Street, walked past there, and I stuck my head in, and the place was jam-packed. But it was a punk band playing. I don't know who they were. It was like,
Yeah.
high tempo, like for 3 minutes on. And the place was packed, and everybody was jumping up and down, and there was beer flying everywhere. Beer and sweat, and I immediately left. It was just too much. Couldn't handle it.
What prompted your move to New York City in the 1980s, which again was a very fertile time? You talk about the Knitting Factory and all the loft jazz that was going on in that era.
Well, a couple of reasons, really. At the time, we were playing over here quite a lot, playing probably more gigs here than we were in Europe, or certainly in the UK. And then I met my wife, who's a native New Yorker. So adding everything up, it just made more sense to live here.
And you were teaching at that time, if I recall.
Yeah, I taught briefly at Drummers Collective, but I never felt I was very successful at it, because I'm not an academic player. I studied at the University of Liverpool, but I studied electronic engineering. I didn't study music. So in terms of music, I'm an autodidact, I suppose.
Right.
The bit I know about music, I've just picked up from being around guys or ladies who know music,
Right.
People like Big Jim Sullivan asking questions. What's that? He said, well, it's a diminished half step of metric modulation. Unlike the recent version of Brand X, I'd be hanging out with Kenny Grohovsky and Chris Clark, and they'd be talking about dotted quarter notes and tuplets and metric modulations. I have no idea what they're talking about, If I can hear it, I'll try and play it. But I can't, from an academic point of view, I don't signal with it,
But I'm sure that your electrical engineering, in terms of effects that you get on your instrument and harmonics and such, I'm sure there's a an intertwining
Oh yeah,
between the two.
no, that was it's been very useful. I mean, I was able to build my own effects back in the 70s. I don't use them now because I've got an Eventide box of tricks.
Harmonizer?
Does the H9, which does all the stuff that the stuff I built used to do, but more, you know.
Yeah.
It's a little box. I mean, my stuff with two 19-inch racks, stuff I built. Although the voltage control filter I built, I still haven't found a commercial version that is as musical as that one. I might end up building another one of those, an analog. Because I kind of miss that sound I used to be able to get with that.
Essentially, a couple of questions. Your pull-offs of the G string off the fingerboard, was that a calculated thing, or did you just happen to do it one day and go, wow, this is great?
It was actually to try and get a sitar type sound.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, okay, I can hear that.
Top of the bottom string, you pull the string so it's almost off the fingerboard.
Right.
So, you hit a note, it starts buzzing. So you get that sort of, pseudo sitar. I mean, sometimes I'll pull it right off the fingerboard so you get like a animated sort of.
There's no pitch when it goes totally off.
Right.
But it's an effect.
A percussive effect, yeah.
Yeah.
The same with the bottom string. It rattles.
Yeah.
For me, it's all things I do trying to express something.
Have you ever used alligator clips? I know it's a strange question, but I think
I've heard of that.
My God, it's great. You put them up where you can actually figure out exactly where you want it, and it sounds like steel drums.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've never tried that, but I've heard of it. I've stuck a book of matches under the strings at the top of the fingerboard. I've tried putting washers over the top string. So you hit the string and the washer will go zzz, it'll just slide up the string and make it
very cool. John Cage would love that.
But it was too unpredictable. I mean, sometimes I felt there was no way of really controlling it, so I gave up. Totally into that stuff. I suppose you could call it paired bass.
Yeah, your 3-finger technique. I mean, I think that's what, like David and I said, is that rare bass player that you can tell in one phrase that we go, oh, yeah, that's Percy. I have one of these, it's called a record. I don't know if you guys remember what records are, but I don't need the credits on the back to tell which tracks you're on because I know exactly what it is, where you are, because I can hear you on the record.
That was Energy Fools the Magician, Brian Eno, from his great album Before and After Science, and that amazing bass part was Percy Jones, our guest. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
And speaking of records, you made so many iconic records with Brian Eno, of course, Brand X, but, Percy, now looking over your career, I've always listened to whatever record you're playing on as an entire piece of music, not just individual tracks. Do you think now in the 21st century that this platform, the album platform, is that still relevant now?
The Brian Eno stuff?
Well, no, I'm saying
no, just the album in general.
A collection of songs.
Oh, yeah. I actually miss that format. The vinyl and the square foot of artwork. In some ways, the vinyl sounds warmer than a 16-bit CD.
Right.
Right. You don't get those grainy kind of artifacts that you get with some CDs. Yeah, well, I miss that. I miss those days with that format. I mean, inevitably technology changes. Nothing stays the same. The number of people that listen to streaming audio and they're happy with it, or MP3s, so much compression, there's no dynamic range, and they're okay with that. I mean, that dismays me a little bit.
Yeah, we live in the high-tech dark ages when it comes to
appreciating really good fidelity anymore. Some people.
Well, I was noticing on your Bandcamp we have Packed On, you're selling your concert live recordings. I think you have one live at Bennett Square, and then you have the bowling concert. I guess that was live at Daryl's house. He did a show.
Yeah. I haven't listened to either of them yet.
They're good. How is that? I mean, now that streaming is a platform, it's a viable platform. Do you think the artist now has more control in the sense that, talk about your past with Brand X, where you had to go to a record label to get your music out. Now, Percy and Pat can go directly to their audience. You don't need a gatekeeper or things like that. Is it the best of times or the worst of times now for an artist such as yourself who doesn't play in the mainstream to be able to reach an audience?
I've got two feelings about that. On one hand, it's good because it makes it easier for people to get their music out there. You don't need back in the 60s, 70s, you couldn't really get any recording out there unless you had a record company behind you. You just couldn't do it. But now now. I mean, you can do that, so that's a good thing. And also, you can control the business side of it and not get ripped off by a record company, which happens a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the negative side of it is there's now such a huge volume of music out there that there's some good quality stuff out there that's getting buried.
Right.
You know, just because of the huge volume of stuff that it has to try and get through. You know, maybe that's a negative side of it.
Right. The worst of times.
There's so much noise to get through to get your stuff heard. Sometimes I worry that there's some really good stuff out there from some very talented people that's just buried, you know, you never hear it.
It's like on Monday, you can record it live. Tuesday, you mix it. Wednesday, you put it out there. Boom.
Yeah. And, you know, 24-bit audio is good, you know. You don't have to dither it or any of that stuff. So,
well, as a fan, it's fun for me. I mean, I like having that stuff. Instead of having to wait a year for your favorite band to put out a record.
Yeah.
How did Pack come together?
I stopped playing with Brand X because I couldn't stand the management anymore. I couldn't stand the way they were doing business.
What a surprise, David.
There was no
management.
Management. Don't they look out for your best interests, David?
Oh, all the time. They've taken everything. They've taken the best from me.
Yeah. I mean, when Brand X reformed in 2016, I could never get any accounting, you know. And like, I started asking, I need some accounting. I want to know how much the venues are paying. I'd like to know how much you guys are getting. I want to know what the expenses are, hotels, you know.
Sure, it's a business.
You know, I have a right to know. It went on for a couple of years. I kept getting this runaround. We're waiting on so-and-so. And so I'm going to talk about this because it's kind of relevant to the whole music.
Of course.
Even though it's kind of negative. So in March of April 2019, I said to them, listen, I'll give you until October to come up with accounting. If you don't, I'm not going to continue. You know? Sure. October comes and still nothing. So I said, well, do you remember our conversation? No. How can you not remember a conversation like that? So waited a few more weeks and still got nothing. I had spreadsheets made up, Excel spreadsheets, 116 gigs, you know, fields for gas tolls, hotels,
Sure.
You know, never got those back. So then the ultimate thing was that one of these guys lived in Florida. He said lightning had struck a tree outside his house and fried his computer. The computer had all the Brand X financial stuff on it.
What a coincidence.
Of course, he never backed it up, right?
Right. And they had no back.
Never heard of the hard drive.
Or that cloud, right? That cloud thing up there.
That's true, too.
I mean, one conversation, it was a laptop. Another conversation, it was a desktop. One conversation was, it was really fucking loud. Next conversation was, good thing there was nobody at home. At that point, I said, fuck this, you know. But I still consider myself an owner of the band, you know, along with John Goodsell. I expect to get royalties. You know, they're selling all that stuff on Bandcamp and not paying me anything. So that was a sad ending for Brand X. Sorry, what was your question?
We're talking about, well, you know, it's interesting, you know, we talk about the hybrid, you know, when we talk about streaming and old school record albums. We were having a conversation with Ron Carter, and one of the things, and Larry Grenadier, and one of the topics that came up with is during the COVID lockdown, Larry and Ron were quite active on streaming, giving streaming concerts, and Larry Grenadier gave a beautiful solo show from the Village Vanguard, which the audio was beautiful, the visuals were beautiful, and understand Zoom and streaming were still, you know, still somewhat a primitive platform. But how do you feel about the fact that, you know, touring now, because of COVID and every state and every country having different regulations? I mean, you see what we're going through in New York City now, right? With the, you know, who doesn't want to wear a mask, who wears a mask and things like that. Well, how do you feel about streaming being that hybrid platform between the record and actually traveling and getting a car and paying for gas and all that? I mean, if Pac did a streaming concert for $25, that'd be great. I
just remembered your original question before I went off on a tangent.
Yeah.
Well, Pac came together. It was actually a suggestion by Leonardo Govi. I stopped working with Brand X. I was looking for somebody else to work with. And several people had suggested Leonardo. And he suggested, I want to put you and Kenny Grahowski, who I'd played with in Brand X, together with Tim Motzer and Alex Skolnick. And those two I'd never played with before. I'd met both of them in the past, but never played with them. So we did this August of last year. We did a gig at Shapeshifter in Brooklyn, which was streamed, not really knowing if it was going to be successful or not, you know. It was still unknown, and there was no audience. They wouldn't allow anybody in there, not even wives, girlfriends. You know, we're all masked up, socially distanced. So I think the only people in the room were Leonardo and two people who work in the audio. We played quite a long time and recorded it, streamed it, and it came out pretty good, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about, and that's led to some more gigs here and there. It's the first time I've actually been involved with this kind of thing, where you do a gig and then it's available for download. And I'm okay with it, especially if it's good audio quality, 24.
That was an excerpt from a live performance by Pat, who's Percy Jones, Alex Skolnick, Ken Grahowski, and Tim Mozart. Great piece of music. You can get this on Bandcamp. It's all through Moon June Records. And let's get back to our guest, Percy Jones. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
I don't like music that's heavily compressed, the loudness wars mentality, just MP3 or, some compressed format.
Yeah.
I'm all for keeping the quality of the music up.
I think as streaming platforms get more sophisticated, I think that the audio will improve.
I mean, the internet generally is getting better with bandwidth, fiber and so on.
What does the future hold for Pat?
We've got two. I mean, the fly in the ointment again is COVID. We've got 2 gigs in September. I think the 11th and the 12th in upstate New York. And then there's a run of gigs in December. They're all around the Northeast, pretty much. Hopefully, we're hoping that we won't lose those because if there's another lockdown.
Right.
That's the worry.
Are you still doing solo things, or would you entertain doing solo?
Well, no, I haven't, because I've got a band called MJ12, really enjoy. So we have a gig coming up in October in Brooklyn. Okay. That's something I really enjoy, playing with those guys.
That was Percy Jones with MJ12 live at Barb's. This is Notes from an Artist on cygnusradio.com.
Do you know what needs to be reissued? Here's an album from your past, Paranoise.
Oh, yeah.
It was a great record.
Yeah.
I mean, not only did you have you had Anthony Jackson.
Yeah. It started out, it was called Noise or Us. And soon after, when I first moved to New York, I lived in Brooklyn. And the first job I had was moving furniture because Brand X had just broken up. The management had dropped us. The record company dropped us. I was suddenly out of work in a new country. So I got a job moving furniture for a few months. And I was in the local supermarket in the vegetable section. And this guy came up to me and said, "Are you Percy?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, we got a band. Do you want to come down and jam? And it was in the neighborhood. So I went down and jammed with these guys, and it was Noise or Us. Got into it, started doing gigs with them, and it was good stuff. It was interesting compositionally. They had a horn section and a vocalist doing all these old time signatures and quite adventurous stuff. And I used to play at CBGB's a lot, which had a great sound system. Yes, it did. I'll say one thing about CBGB's, David. You took your life in your hands playing there, but the sound was great.
Yeah, you just don't go to the bathroom.
Right. That's right. Almost as bad as a marquee. So I played with them for, I don't know, probably 18 months. But then Toys R Us threatened to sue them because of the name. So they changed the name to Paranoise. And then I think they got signed to Ireland, I think. And I think I played on one record. And Anthony Jackson also did some of it, I think, both in the same.
Yeah. They should reissue that record. It's a great record. And you're right. The compositions are quite challenging.
Yeah. Jim Matus wrote a lot of the stuff. The singer died, unfortunately, quite a while ago, Mickey Ortiz. So that broke it up, essentially.
Yeah.
But those are good memories playing with them.
Yeah, I'm glad.
When you look back over your career, Percy, what are some of the records you're most proud of, or ones that really stand out to you?
Well, some of the Brand X stuff. I mean, the earlier stuff, not the couple of records we did recently. I'm not so impressed with those. Brian Eno, I love working with him.
When you're working with a master producer, what do you learn from someone like Brian Eno that you translate yourself as a band leader or even a band member or collaborator?
The impression I got with him was, I always thought he was quite smart. He'd given at least for me, he gave the musicians enough slack. You could be yourself, playing your own style. He had a way of directing you to make a good contribution to what he wanted without altering his style, or he wouldn't get you to play something you were uncomfortable with. I thought that was quite a talent that he could recognize. He could walk that line.
It's interesting. It strikes me that Brian is the type of band leader like a Miles Davis, and that he just has a knack for bringing people together, the right people together. And what's beautiful about, again, I'll reference Before and After Science, a masterpiece of a record, is it's nice to hear your personality within Eno's context. And it doesn't overshadow Eno, it actually enhances what he was doing. Another Green World, the same thing.
Yeah.
You're playing on that. It's an Eno record, but you can hear the personality of the players, and of course all the other players on the record as well.
Well, we recorded a lot of stuff. A lot of it was never used. I mean, sometimes it was just the two of us working. I do a track of electric bass, bass, overdub a track of upright bass, and we were like just experimenting. Really, it was fun. I mean, it was really interesting.
It's also interesting when you think about it that the music for airports, which was technically supposed to be, I hate to use the term background music, but he wanted it to be background music. Yeah. We just had a conversation with Ben Neal, and one of the things Ben was talking about, which goes along with the streaming, is the fact that now music is everywhere. It's almost, who was it that furniture music? I don't remember who it was, but furniture music. And it's an interesting concept because truly he was the first. And while he's doing that, he's doing, of course, Green World and all this other stuff. And
I was always searching for music for washing dishes. I never found. I'm still looking,
Yeah, but wouldn't the white noise from the water sort of, well, actually, it might mix in beautifully.
Yes, as long as you don't get soap on your fretboard. What's the?
Well, he was very adventurous. I don't know, one day, I'm trying to remember who was there. It was me and Phil and might have been Fred Frith, I can't remember. But we all had a piece of paper and said, write down 1 to 100. And then he says, number 1, Percy, you play an F sharp. And then number 2, Phil, you hit whatever. Number 3, and then there's all these instructions. So he started a click or a metronome, I can't remember. This F sharp, and then ding, and then, and then Phil is throwing water bottles across the room. There's a bicycle on the other side of the room, and he's trying to hit the bicycle like in time with a click. I think we got up to 11.
He's got this app now called Oblique Strategies, and you shake the app, and it's almost like the 8 ball, that has it tells you what to do. As a matter of fact, here, okay, so Oblique Strategies, shake. So it goes through all these things, and my rule for today is assemble some of the elements in the group and treat the group.
Well, I remember back then he had what looked like playing cards.
Right. Well, this is that.
I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if they were tarot cards or what the hell was going on, but he'd break these things out. I figured I was part of his decision-making process. Nothing to do with Aleister Crowley or...
Right.
I remember another time we were deep into something and we were talking about it. Because another cool thing about him was he was open to suggestions. He could suggest something and he listened. Because some guys, like, you can't do that. It's my record. You shut up, If he's not like
the guy who gave you the fretted bass.
We're into this sort of discussion, and he said, let's have some cake. And he goes under the desk, and he's got paper plates, and I think it was a fruit cake, cuts everybody a slice of cake. So we're all standing around eating cake. And then everybody totally forgot about what we were talking about. And I often wonder if that was a deliberate...
Oh, it sounds it, doesn't it?
A technique, a great technique.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous.
If it was, it worked, Yeah,
that's great.
Those sessions were a lot of fun, I remember going home after those sessions and feeling good, like, that was some cool stuff today.
Yeah. So much of that work stands up today. I mean, I listened to, again, Green World Before and After Science and those records, and they're still relevant nearly 50 years later.
There's a track which is just bass and prepared piano, but I think it's called Masks, actually. On
Masks, yeah.
Right. It's hard to know what to play, really.
That was the title track, Masks, from the Brand X album, Masks. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
David, any other topics you'd like to cover?
No, hey, listen, we got to alligator clips, so we're fine.
All right. Thanks for talking with us, Percy.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. By the way, can I just add one little thing?
Sure. Absolutely.
A bit negative, just going back to this Brand X nonsense, but there were some pretty negative narratives going out that I retired or I'd stopped playing. I'd staying at home to work with my wife. My hands were messed up. I can't play anymore. Some pretty negative rumors. I just want to just get it out there. My hands are okay. I can play. Everything's good. So I just wanted to say that.
I want to give you a title of a book I saw at Shakespeare's bookstore maybe 30 years ago. What other people think of me is none of my business.
Well, that was before social media, unfortunately. And, what is the saying? A lie gets around the world before truth gets its boots on. So
that's one of the really negative things about Facebook is the
misinformation
that out there. I mean, you're seeing it in politics, obviously, but also the way people can smear other people. Troubling, but there you go.
There you go.
So I'm glad you guys invited me on here. I can clear this stuff up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we are doing something. The reason I asked you about the solo performance, Tom and I just hooked up with the cutting room. We're going to be doing something called podformances. And what it basically is similar to what we did today, but it'll be in front, God willing, of a live audience, and it'll be a podcast / performance. So if you'd like to grab some of your old 70s boxes and come on board, we'd love to do something with you.
It'll be fun. We'll give you more information on that soon as, like I said, COVID willing. And with,
Right. Okay. Oh,
it's like Actors Playhouse or
92nd Street Y kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But we're allowed to curse as opposed to them. We can. Right. All right, Percy, be well.
All right, bye-bye. Cheers. Thank you very much. All right.
Well, that's our show for tonight. I want to thank my co-host Tom Semioli and, of course, Percy Jones for a great interview. And don't forget, pick up his new recording through Bandcamp, Packed, Live and Pauling. I also want to let you know that we are archiving all of our shows via our podcast, also titled Notes from an Artist, which you can find on all major podcast players or at notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com. Have a great week, and thanks for listening. This is David Gross with co-host Tom Semioli. Take care. See you next week.